Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Board Leadership Award Learning Series of videos. I'm excited to be joined today by Edith Bullard and Anne Schrantz, who you'll meet in a second. My name is Sean Sweeney. I am the Director of Education and Special Programs at the Center for Nonprofit Advancement. We're super excited to be sharing this series of videos this year. Just like last year, we're not out of the pandemic. So in lieu of an in-person event, the center has decided to do this series of learning videos that feature best practices from this year's Board Leadership Award competition. The Board Leadership Award distinguishes boards that go above and beyond recommended standards and fundamentals to bring new levels of leadership to their role, resulting in positive changes and notable successes for their organizations. So we're super excited this year to have a winner and an honorable mention. We're joined today by Edith, who is the board chair of our winner, Carpenter Shelter, who you'll meet again in a second. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and pass over to Anne Schrantz with Cohn-Resnick, the Board Awards presenting sponsor. Over to you, Anne.
Great. Thanks so much, Sean. Really appreciate the opportunity today to introduce myself and to share these great best practices from the Board Leadership Award. Cohn-Resnick is a national accounting and audit and tax firm. We have offices here in the Washington area as well as around the country. I help lead our Mid-Atlantic not-for-profit practice, and we're very proud to be the founding sponsor of the award and to have supported it all these years. When we first started the award with the Center for Nonprofit Advancement, the goal was really to celebrate the great things that nonprofit boards were doing in the area of governance, and as auditors and tax professionals, governance is a big area for us as well. And so we felt that supporting board governance and innovations in board governance in the nonprofit space was a great place to dedicate our time and resources to. And the center has provided a great platform for that. We have a great committee that goes through all the applications and really adds a lot to the entire process. So I want to thank them. And we're really thrilled to have Edith here representing Carpenter Shelter as our winner this year. So I'll turn it over to Sean and Edith to take you through the discussion, but thanks very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Anne. Well, thank you to Anne so much for providing that intro of Cohn-Resnick, our sponsor. They've been the sponsor of the award, like she said, since it was founded 10 years ago. So we are super, super thankful to Anne and her team at Cohn-Resnick, as well as BoardSource, who is our educational support on the award. So just kind of give some background on this, this specific video. The topic of today's video is leading an organization through transformation. One of the things that the selection committee for the award was super impressed with Carpenter Shelter during the whole process was the fact that Carpenter Shelter moved from just a homeless shelter, and I even hesitate to use the word just because obviously as a homeless shelter they were doing incredible work and important work, but over the last few years they have actually kind of totally shifted to becoming really a homeless services organization. They've transformed their space, which we'll talk about, and built a new site. And all of this was done in the midst of changing board dynamics and people coming on and off the board and kind of playing with the structure of the board itself to get them to where they are now. So Edith, thank you again so much for joining. My first question, and it's kind of long, but it's multi-parts. I'm wondering if you can just kind of talk us through the process and the conversations that the board had that led to the decision to update the mission and vision and kind of structure. The follow-up questions are, how long did this take? We want to make sure we're giving people an accurate timeline of all the work that goes into something like this. Who was involved? What types of conversations were had? And then finally, did you enlist the help of any outside consultant at any point in the process?
Sure. So first, thank you for having me, and thank you for awarding Carpenter Shelter this great award. It was really, the whole process of, moving from being a homeless shelter to changing our mission to being about eradicating homelessness was quite a process. It was kind of iterative. It started out as just conversations in the board. And a lot of those conversations were around things like, what are the drivers of homelessness? What are the drivers of homelessness in Alexandria? And as an organization, what is our role in addressing the drivers? And so, probably before doing anything, I'm sorry. Go over.
Cattail, no problem.
Okay. I don't know how we do this. You want me to start that one over, or you want me to?
Oh, no, that's okay. Keep going. You're good.
So more than, kind of, we just had discussion, more like informal discussions as part of the board for the longest time about kind of what are we really here to do, and how can we have the most impact. Well, it was probably around starting with our 2019-2020 planning process, strategic planning process, that we began to really think about, kind of what our mission really was. And we, felt as though just saying that we provided shelter at a point in time was not really addressing homelessness. And so we started thinking about, kind of through partnership, through allyship, through looking at our service and our service offerings, that, we needed to kind of start doubling down on what it took to actually live the promise of eradicating homelessness. And so in our 2021 strategic plan, we changed the actual mission and vision language to include this construct of eradicating homelessness. But in 21-22, the conversation started being, well, what does that mean? It's one thing to say you do it, but what do you mean? And so we engaged Compass, who came in and helped us through a strategic planning process of thinking about things like, one, and we'll talk about this later, in our new development and with our new vision, what did that mean for how Carpenter Shelter should offer service? And so it literally, to move from kind of not only, saying it to operationalizing it, probably took somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 2.5 years to get everybody on board, to get everybody understanding what the language meant, and then to get everybody thinking about what does it mean for an organization to actually do the work.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because, it's that thing where it's easier said than done, right? You have these conversations and everything's going smoothly, but then it's like, you still there's so much behind it that it's going to take some time. So it's nice to hear that the time that it did take you guys, because I think that's just a realistic expectation to set, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, saying things are very simple, but when you can't make that big and bold of a statement without thinking about, then how are you going to make it real? Because that's what people measure you on.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you for that. So this one is kind of piggybacking off of that. But so, the board has been talking about changing the mission and vision and kind of the structure stuff like that, really bringing it back down to zero. So how long between those board conversations and like the actual change, and is it still ongoing? Like, how long did that take, and what actually went into kind of the implementation process of putting into work the new mission and vision?
Yes, it is absolutely still going on. I mean, I don't think that it'll ever particularly end, because I think that as you think you've solved a problem, there's another one that comes up, or if you think that you've really tied down a construct, another one comes up. So I don't think it ever ends. One of the things that I'm really proud of our board about is that I think we do a really good job of just trying to assess what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and assessing not only kind of from a service perspective, but also from a governance perspective, kind of how are we living our mission and how are we living our vision. And as you know, Sean, a lot has happened, even this year, a lot has happened this year. When we dealt with kind of the reckoning the country went through last year after the death of George Floyd, that certainly changed how we thought about eradicating homelessness as it related to systemic racism systems, as it related to things like power structures, as we, looked at things like, kind of what's going on with the pandemic. We had to think about how you eradicate homelessness when you think about things like, a really, great, tumult in kind of just how people live day to day. And so looking at those 4 words or 3 words, eradicating homelessness, as almost an everyday kind of thing, and then thinking about what's going on in the marketplace and how do we try to address those things. And sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's really difficult. I really commend our strategic planning committee, who does a lot of good work around not allowing us to just say the words, but to actually come up with, so what does that mean? And what are the things you're going to get done in the next 6 months? What are the things you're going to get done in the next 12 months that mean that we've lived that out? And then holding us to that and coming back and assessing it every once in a while. So it really is very circular for us that we live it and we believe in it. We train around it. When we talk about eradicating homelessness and kind of what the racial inequities are. So we've done a ton of racial equity training. All of those things, it's just not one of those things you can say it's one and done. It's nothing you can check off of the list. It's something you have to continue to work at day after day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes perfect sense. Thank you so much for that. So kind of talking about even just the strategic planning process, especially around this topic, I think at some point it became clear to you all that to really become kind of a, one-stop shop homeless services organization, it became clear that a new building would be on the table, and a new site, and being able to leverage that and provide more services. Obviously, that is a huge undertaking, building an entire new building. So I'm wondering if you can kind of talk us through that. Like, when did that become clear throughout the process that it was kind of a necessity for you all to do that? And briefly, because I know this could probably be an entirely different video, like
Yes.
What types of conversations went into that part of the decision-making process?
Right. So there's a lot there, and there's a lot there you can unpack for sure. So, even given kind of the change of the mission and values, the conversations about a new structure happened even way before that. So the first time the board considered a new building was probably in the 2005, 2006 timeframe. I wasn't on the board then. And at that point, they decided that it was kind of not just feasible. It just wasn't attractive financially. And they looked at it primarily from a financial viewpoint. That was their lens, was a financial view. And one of the things the Carpenter Shelter has always been proud about is, we owned our building, we owned the land. And so that was a great asset for us that many organizations don't have. And so it was kind of, how do you get the most out of it? How do you leverage that asset? That was a totally different board. And again, like I said, they were very much focused on, what is the, what are the financial aspects of it? I'd say probably, fast forward another 10 years, 11 years forward. And we had this conversation again when AHDC came to us and worked with a gentleman who was on our board for the longest time. And we're friends to talk about, was there a mission value to changing our building? Put finances aside, even though it was important. Was there a way that we could move forward our mission of providing affordable housing? Because one of the things that has been a real trigger for us forever has been that the key to homelessness in Alexandria is affordable housing. There just is not enough of it. And so if we truly are talking about eradicating homelessness, part of what we have to do is how can we add to the affordable housing stock? And so, that began that conversation then that was more mission driven than it was financially driven. And I have to say it was tough. It was a tough time. There were many, many board members who had been on in the first iteration of this who didn't believe that it was feasible, who were concerned about the risk involved, who felt that, we were doing a solid job as is. Why did we want to shake up the barrel and do this? And as you mentioned, throughout this conversation, throughout this reiteration, we had new board members come in, and we had a change of an executive director who had vision, an executive director who had some passion, and an executive director who was really good at collaborating and discordant opinions together to come to conversations that were really, really more productive. And I think that's when we began to see a trajectory of movement, is when people started, having real conversations, people on the board, having real conversations about, kind of what were the risks, but what were going to be the things that were going to be, what would we get if we took the risk? And it was, like I said, it still was tough. I mean, this is not an easy decision to make, not at all. But we really did feel that, going from our lovely, old DMV, reconstructed building to having a purpose-built shelter that was combined with units of affordable housing really would help us move our mission forward. And so, it probably took a year of discussion, and it probably took almost a year of just negotiation between us and the developer about what it was going to take to do something like this. And keep in mind that as a homeless shelter, it's not like we could close our doors and say, okay, we're building a new building, we'll get back to you, we really had to also then be concerned about how are we going to continue to offer services once we vacated the existing building we were in. And that probably even in itself, finding an alternative that was going to work for us probably took a year and a half. So it was a process. It was a slow process. It was a process that we needed to go through, and we needed to learn how to deal with conflict. We needed to learn how to have constructive conversations. We had to learn things about, developing projects and stuff that many of us on the board had no knowledge of. One of the things that I have always valued about Carpenter Shelter Board, though, is that we've always, if the knowledge isn't on the board, we've always had a way to bring the knowledge to the board. And I think that was really important throughout this process, that we had lawyers and other developers and folks who knew about this coming to the board and helping us have real conversations about was this possible and doable. In addition to kind of all the concrete things, it was just a wonderful mission lift. It was aspirational to be able to say that we were going to take over something this big, this huge, that would have this much impact. And I think that motivated the board to just keep this project moving, even when it felt as though, kind of we weren't going to have a place to move to, even when it felt as though, we couldn't sign another contract, or, we weren't sure that we had enough funds. We kept it going. And we thought that, because we, in the end, felt aspirational that if we could make this happen, it would have a real impact on not only the services we provide, but the people we provide the services for. I
loved that answer, because I think that it really portrays just like every aspect of board governance. You were talking about how the board back in the year 2005, 2006 was probably very risk averse, very in tune to the financials, which in some ways is, that was their job. That was what they're supposed to do. The board members are supposed to be kind of risk managers on top of all the other board governance work they're doing. But I love how you talk about how if we're going to be aspirational, if we want to do this mission lift that you mentioned, it's super important to kind of keep that in mind, of course, but really talk about, where we could go and what we could do to get us there. And I love that. Thank you for that. To kind of bring it home now, and you kind of touched on this during that answer, I really kind of want to get down to the nuts and bolts of the board structure. You mentioned that there was a lot of change and turnover during that time period. And so if you could kind of talk us through what actually kind of occurred there, like how long that kind of turnover took, but then also how did Carpenter Shelter and their board ensure a strong board through this period of transformation? And bringing people on, you mentioned having it was so useful to have previous developers, lawyers. Were there certain skill sets you were looking for in your recruitment, things like that? If you can just kind of talk us through that.
Sure. So Carpenter Shelter has always been supportive of really strong boards, and they are deeply committed and have been deeply committed to the shelter. But I think that one of the things I will say is that they were boards that were very homogenous, and and everyone kind of looked the same, and in many ways thought the same. And so I think that one of the big drivers of our board, as we were beginning to have people kind of roll off of the board, before I came on, they did adopt term limits. And so with term limits, we really began to see people, formally and strategically rolling off of the board and creating new opportunities for new people to join the board. And so in that, one of our drivers, of course, was just kind of diversifying the board. And not just diversifying the board in race, although I will say that when I joined the board, I was one of 2 Blacks on the board. And today, the board is probably evenly split between people of color and whites, which is a huge difference. So certainly that was part of diversification, but it was also diversification of thoughts and ways of thinking. It was also a diversification of skills, because I think that, we have a board right now that has a really nice mix of, left brain and right brain thinkers, who has a really good mix of kind of, we've fundraisers, and we've got, strategic planners, and we've got, folks who like really are kind of data wonks, and all of that I think is really important when you start thinking across, kind of all the things that a board might need. And so, and it's continuing to evolve. It is continuing to evolve. One of my goals is that, to bring more impacted people onto our board, because who better can talk about life experiences of the homeless than those who have experienced homelessness. And so I think that, again, that's one of those things that never get to a point where we go, check, we've got it. But I think we always are looking at kind of, as a board, what do we need to get to where we need to go? And how do we get there? And one of the ways that we do it, and I know that, kind of different organizations have different ways of looking at it, but we use our committee structure as a pipeline into the board. And so, and our committees are usually focused on very specific things, be that fundraising, we have an innovation committee, we have a racial equity committee, and we look for people who have expertise in those areas that can serve on those committees. And then look to kind of see where the real expertise and passion is that might be, kind of driven toward the board. And so we're constantly looking for people who both, like they have the passion, but also bring an expertise that can help us meet our goals. And I think, again, that's ongoing. I think that, the board of today looks very different from the board that I joined 6-7 years ago. Won't say that's a better board. I will just say it's a different board. And I think it's a board that's driven by kind of some of these diverse thoughts and diverse age and diversity and race and ethnicity, et cetera. And I think that's only a good thing, because that's the world we live in. And I think it's important that we bring multiple voices to the table when you start talking about eradicating homelessness.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Edith. That was my last question. I really, really appreciate you joining me today for this video. And congratulations again to you and the team at Carpenter Shelter for winning this year's Board Leadership Award. We're super excited to have you as this year's winner. So, and even more excited to be able to kind of share the best practices we pulled out from this year's process. So thank you for joining us. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. This is one of 3 videos that we will be releasing following this year's award competition and process. So keep your eyes peeled for the other 2. But again, I want to say thank you to Edith. Thank you to Anne, who joined us earlier from CohnReznick, to BoardSource, and of course to our selection committee for their hard work on this year's process. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.